The event in which the Skrulls attack Earth is the culmination of a plan that Marvel's senior staff drew up several years ago and that influenced multiple collections. Secret Invasion is more of a conclusion and glued to a series of events than an individual event in itself. During the early 21st century, Marvel executives and creatives had come to the conclusion that many of their collections were showing signs of exhaustion, so they devised a plan to turn that decaying universe upside down and create a new order, which included a more adult of focusing the stories and the presence of emerging figures to the detriment of the great classics of the publishing house. Since Bendis gave the starting signal to the process in 2004, a series of events were chained until reaching Secret Invasion in 2008, the disintegration of the Avengers in the comic Avengers Disunited, the madness of the Scarlet Witch in House of M, the hiding of frontline heroes in Civil War, the death of Captain America, the exile of the Hulk with World War Hulk, and the disintegration of the superheroes in several mini-teams spread across the different states. Although treated as independent situations, all of them had a common denominator in the weight loss of the most powerful characters in the Marvel Universe. In this context comes Secret Invasion, which presents the attack on Earth by the Skrulls, an alien race capable of taking any form and that for years had been infiltrating both superhero groups and S.H.I.E.L.D. In this process, relevant characters have been replaced by sleeper agents that were exact replicas of the original characters. Many of the inexplicable situations of those events found a coherent story since they were part of a plan drawn up by the extraterrestrials to undermine human resistance. To understand the origin of this conflict, we must go back to the early 70s to the Kree-Skrull War, during which several superheroes were taken prisoner by the shapeshifters and their powers replicated. From that very moment, the Skrulls understand that the Earth is part of their empire and their sacred mission is to free the planet and its inhabitants from a system of government that fosters confrontation. It is the promise of a better life that moves the great gears of a holy war of liberation. The story of the infiltrated enemy whose identity is unknown is taken directly by Bendis from the cinema of the 1950s and 1960s, which at that time is a mirror of the paranoia that was experienced in American society due to the presence of communist agents on American soil. Movies like Invasion of the Body Snatchers by Don Siegel in 1956 or The Manchurian Candidate of John Frankenheimer in 1962 reflect that fear of not knowing if the person in front of you is a friend or an enemy. But Bendis takes little advantage of this game since he bets more on the action than on the intrigue. He resolves quickly and running many situations that, for example in the hands of Ed Brubaker, would have given a lot of play. The feeling is that Bendis arrives at this point in the general story creatively exhausted and decides to solve a story by way of fights whose pieces had taken several years to fit together. Something like that happens in Alex de la Iglesias films, where the development is usually much more interesting than the ending. There are parts of the story, such as the religious motivation that seems to drive the conflict or the need to kidnap Reed Richards, that are left without a coherent explanation. Not to mention the participation of many characters who have dominated the front page for a long time and who suddenly assume a secondary role or are directly ignored. On the creative side, artist Lainil Francis Yu takes care of the pencils. The Filipino is an old acquaintance of Bendis from his stage in The New Avengers and is the ideal artist for a comic that bets more on the visual than on the narrative. Yu moves well in the large double-page illustrations that feature lots of action and many figures in the composition, but the arrangement of the panels does not help to improve the narrative. Visually, the pages are impressive, but there are too many panels without text and excessively great, although that's 80% the writer's fault. The price paid by superheroes for Secret Invasion is not cheap, on the one hand, and as usual in Bendis, there are deaths, and on the other hand the old guard falls from grace, giving way to a new order in which Norman Osborn the Green Goblin takes control of both national security through Hammer and vigilantes with the Dark Avengers. Thus begins Dark Reign, which is the antithesis of what the Golden Age of superheroes had meant. Now the villains are in charge of protection, conspiracies are the order of the day, and citizens give up rights in exchange for security. All of this is a reflection of an American society that was still in shock from 9/11, where infiltrated agents had attacked the United States, and from a war in Afghanistan in which contractor organizations, with dubious motivations, took center stage. It is true that Secret Invasion is not by far the best work of Bendis, but we must also recognize the enormous merit of getting the Marvel Comics to move in more adult codes and stuck to a reality that, although sifted by fantasy, was related to the lived day by day his fellow citizens. Thank you for visiting our channel about comics and pop culture. Subscribe to Uncanny Collectibles for more exclusive information, news, and scoops.